Last time we were taking a look at the ongoing issues that we have relevant to religion, and so this is going to be part two of our ongoing discussion of religion and religious extremism. And as we were taking a look in the last lecture on some of the ongoing concerns that we have within our society, where some people are more alienated and aloof. And we examined how there was that moment in time, just temporarily, with Apollo 8 and then later with Apollo 11 moon landings that made us feel more connected and interrelated. And some of the propaganda of seeing ourselves as separate entities started to disappear. And of course, that did start to wane. We started to revert back to more of our natural tendencies, or the tendencies of the natural man, to see ourselves as different and separate and individual. And some of the complexities that happen with this. And then we examined some of these ideas of religion and how religion ties into some of these more difficult, challenging aspects. It seems as though, as nationalism has started to wane, and as religion has started to wane, we've become less connected, or there's a feeling of less connected elements within that. And I wanted to continue that thought a little bit today as we take a look at religious extremism and some of the socio-political issues that are going on with globalization. But I wanted to frame this discussion a little bit by taking a look at religious extremism and its affiliation with our contemporary world. And there seems to be more of this uh, rise of religious extremism. At the same time, there's this on the other side, this tendency to become more non-religious, or less affiliated with organized religion. But we see with movements such as jihadist movements that are associated with Islam, that they tend to see others as an existential threat. They see in terms of a dualistic mindset. There's either us or there's them. They feel that their way of life is being threatened by the West, and they need to preserve their tradition, their heritage, their religion, their way of life, and the West is seeking to destroy their very roots of who they are. And so this is the very nature of extremism. And that's what we're going to take a look at today, is this kind of extremist idea. With extremists, there is no collaboration, there's no cooperation, there is no compromise, there is only me or you. And we see this not just with jihadists, but there's also some very extremist Christian sects that are out there, Christian fundamentalism, such as you see here with the Westboro Baptists. I don't know how familiar you are with this particular group, but they generally go to places and they picket. They picket places like abortion clinics, or they protest funerals. But mainly what they're known for is their hate speech. We see here that they hate soldiers. Over here on the top side, right? You're going to hell. Thank God for dead soldiers. They hate homosexuals. They hate Jewish people. They hate anyone who is not them. And moreover, God hates who they hate. And that's an interesting notion. Religious extremism seem to think that God loves who they love and hate who they hate. Such groups share similar ideas to jihadists. They see the world in a dualistic way. They feel threatened by gays or people of other races. They feel that such people are an existential threat to their beliefs and their way of life, so they protest. Now, I don't want you to think or assume that the jihadists and the Westboro Baptists are exactly the same. They're not. Westboro Baptists have hate speech and they protest, but they don't bomb and they don't create wars as the jihadists do. And so I don't want you to think that there's a one-for-one correlation between them. The level of danger is definitely not the same. What I'm trying to get you to think about here instead is that they have similar mindsets between them that are noteworthy. And just getting away from kind of religious extremism for a moment, I wanted to take a look at other elements of extremism that we face today to show you some of these similar common narratives that they all tend to have. In all, it seems like as the rise of the social movements become fundamental extremists, and they almost become quasi-religious. We see extremist movements in like CrossFit or video games or Comic-Con, environmentalism, political movements such as the Tea Party, whatever the case may be. And these almost have become new religions unto themselves. It seems like as organized religions has waned, there has become more of a rise in other social movements to fill the void. In each of them, in one way or another, they promise some way of life or some type of meaning. However, the main problem that we're going to face with these quasi religions is not necessarily them in and of themselves per se. The main problem that we're going to face is with fundamentalism. The narrative of fundamentalism is that society has lost its way and needs to return to its roots. This will be the major socio-political clashes over the next several decades. The narrative of fundamentalism is that we cannot sustain our current way of life, and we need radical change to return to our pure essence. We see this with fundamental movements or environmental fundamental movements, such as that suggest that our modern way of doing agriculture or using energy is polluting the environment. We need less chemicals, we need less carbon emissions, we need less pollution. We need to return to the natural elements of what made us human beings before modernization, because this is our pure essence, where humanity used to be. We see these similar ideas, these similar fundamentalist narratives with conservative movements like the Tea Party, which argue that our way of government has become corrupt, and we need to return to the pure essence of what our founding fathers have envisioned. We need to get back to the Constitution and the basic elements of our world. But we see this kind of jihadist mindset that we have a similar kind of a narrative with the jihadist mindset that we've become godless in the world. And we need to return to a more theocratic way of life, the way life used to be. And I like this particular cartoon here, where you see Osama bin Laden on the right and George Bush on the left. Different kind of mindset, different type of way of doing things. But there's a similar narrative, a similar common idea that they're both sharing, right? Just doing the work of the Almighty in both of them, right? And so Osama bin Laden would argue that he's doing the work of God by tearing down the very foundations of the corrupt West, which has become the great Satan, and he is fighting against that. George W. Bush has a very similar narrative as well. He's tearing down the radical extremists that are seeking to uproot the Western civilization and trying to make us more ungodly. Similar type of narratives, and it's kind of interesting. Ironically, they're actually the similar kind of outcomes, right? Both of them use war and death in order to obtain their objectives for God, right? All doing it in the name of their religion. But again, while some of the fundamentalist movements are more extreme and more dangerous than others, and there's little comparison between environmentalism and jihadists, for instance, or Tea Party and jihadists, for instance. What I wanted to get you to think about is that the messages are all similar, right? We have become corrupt and we need to return to some earlier point where we were less so. The problem is the fundamentalists share a dualistic mindset. They oversimplify very complex social issues and promote an oversimplified solution. So the real problem that we're going to face for the foreseeable future is this dualism, which relates to extremism and it relates to fundamentalism. They like an oversimplified view of the world to create an either or bubble. You're either with them or you are the enemy. We see this in our current politics. Democrats and Republicans, have a similar narrative. Democrats see Republicans as the enemy. Republicans see Democrats as evil. The truth is that they both have some good points and they both have some problematic ideas. Neither are fully true and neither are completely wrong. But framing it in an either or scenario with the added pressure that one way is going to lead to salvation and the other way is going to lead to destruction is problematic. Republicans suggest that if we help the poor, we're going to create a welfare state and bankrupt the economy, for instance. The Democrats say, on the other hand, that if we don't help the poor, then they will starve and we're going to be bad people. Truth generally lies somewhere in the middle. The solution to our complex social problems is going to be much more complex and nuanced. I've found that simple solutions don't work and only appeal to simple minds. As I have watched the news over the last couple of days, I've observed an interesting narrative. I follow news in France and New York Times, Wall Street Journal, CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News. I try to get a sense of what they're all saying, and it's an interesting way. It's interesting that the way that each of them shapes what's happening. You have the same event being reported, but a very different interpretation of the events, right? One news outlet, for instance, focuses on the growing concern of the virus and how it's going to overrun healthcare facilities. Another news source reports on the same pandemic, but focuses instead on how the virus is affecting the economy. The same event, but different emphasis. So the real war that we're going to face is going to be the war with information, and more importantly, the interpretation of that information. And so the real battle is not going to be on the battlefields. Our future wars will most likely be the war of ideas. It will be ideology. The idea that one nation facing another nation and battling for supremacy seems all but gone. Sure, there probably are going to be some skirmishes here and there, but the idea of one country's army and navy fighting against another's army and navy seems to be something that is hopefully in our past. Of course, some near future developments may change this. Who knows how that's going to play out? However, the current trend seems to suggest that the ideas of World War I or World War II happening again seems unlikely. Those of you that are in political science will be familiar with a study that states that never have there been two democratic nations that have fought in a war. There have been wars between democracies and dictatorships, but no two democracies have ever fought in a war. The world trend tends to be more and more for the world to turn towards democracy. So it seems less and less likely. So what are the wars going to be in the future? Right? So what we're going to see is that it's going to shape the way that we kind of see the world, the way that we see ideas. And in fact, the war on terror exposed the U.S.'s old mindset regarding war was outdated and it needed to be updated if we're going to move into this, new century. After September 11th, the U.S. wanted to fight that old type of war, finding a nation to fight against. And so we went to war with Iraq and then later Afghanistan. But we soon learned that our battleships and airplanes were less effective in this type of war. We learned that this is much more of a person-to-person war. The enemy doesn't wear a single uniform like they used to. They're not easily identifiable. The enemy looks identical to our allies. They wear the same clothes and live in the same places. And it makes it very, very difficult to be able to identify. And it makes it feel like we're fighting ghosts or we're fighting against shadows. We're fighting people who are our friends one day and our enemies the next. And it's a different type of war than what we were used to. And it reminds me a lot of the Book of Mormon, where there were a lot of wars between the Nephites and the Lamanites, these two nations that were battling for supremacy. However, there came a point when the true enemy was not the Lamanites or the Nephites, it was the Gadianton robbers. They hid among the people to undermine the way of life. And in many ways, this is the war on terror. While there may be national wars at some point in the future, who knows how society will change, it seems to be that the direction, right, for the foreseeable future is that we're going to be fighting smaller scale pockets against ideology, where we're beginning fighting against extremism and fundamentalism. So this is where I wanted to turn my attention today. And as we take a look at the article that I had you read, Benjamin Barber's McWorld versus Jihad, he writes this article in the 1980s when we're in the midst of the Cold War. And what he argues almost prophetically is he says that the main conflicts that we're going to have in the future are not going to be these large-scale conflicts. He argues that the main problem that we're going to fight is this idea of globalization versus the efforts to resist globalization. And he gives them the demarcation of McWorld versus Jihad. And so as you think about this in the 1980s, the big company that was taking the world by storm was McDonald's. It was aggressively seeking to go to throughout the world into different countries to try to, put its brand out there. And so it's a symbol of globalization. And then the jihad, what he argues, the jihadist movements are movements that are going to resist globalization. And so again, what you're going to see is a battle of ideology, a battle for supremacy over which mindset is going to work. And again, the idea is both of them are going to be an extremist take on the way of seeing the world. And both of them are going to combat because one can't allow the other one to survive, right? They almost seem, or at least they present themselves as one is antithetical to the other, right? McWorld wants to completely globalize and turn the nation into one kind of image. The jihadist world wants to preserve its tradition, preserve its heritage, and maintain its current way of doing business. But again, thinking about the idea of McWorld, I mean, he would have, if he wrote it today, he probably would have said it was, Amazon versus Jihad, or he would have said it was Walmart versus Jihad, or whatever the case may be. But again, what's interesting about this article is and when most people were thinking that the major conflict is going to be a thermonuclear war between the United States and the Soviet Union, he's suggesting it's going to be a smaller scale pockets that's tribalism versus globalization. And so in a lot of ways, it's very prophetic and very profound. And so that's why I wanted you to take a look at this, his essay, because he actually brings a lot of ideas out that are going to be what we're going to be contending with for the next foreseeable future in terms of art and propaganda. And so we'll take a look today at the tension between the political and economic forces that are conflicting with social movements and religions as we examine the ideas that are brought to light by Barber's McWorld versus Jihad. Taking a look at what globalization is, I wanted to give you a definition of this because even though we've been talking about religion and we've been talking about cults and the extremism with that, but we've also been kind of on the outer peripheries discussing this idea of connectivity versus isolation. And this is all going to kind of come to a head with Benjamin Barber's ideas. And so I'm giving you the groundwork for understanding this discussion so that you can kind of think about where your ideas are, right? So thinking about what globalization is, because this is going to help us to understand what jihadists are actually, resisting. And so we can understand them a little bit more. The argument is that corporations mainly want to expand their profits, right? And in fact, corporations, just stopping there for a second, corporations are actually legally obligated to expand their profits, right? They're legally obligated to their shareholders to continue to try to do things to expand the worth, the value of a particular company. And in fact, if shareholders believe that a CEO is doing something that is negligent or reckless, the shareholders can actually sue the corporation. So the main focus of a corporation is to expand their profits. And so what they want to do is they want to enter into global markets to increase their economic capital. The idea of increasing the economic capital is they want to go into finding new markets, new places where people will be able to buy their products. And if they find new people to buy their products, they're going to increase their revenue, right? But they also want to go into global markets to find new resources, natural resources, and also find cheap labor. So to cut the cost of production, and the more you cut the cost of production, then the more that you're going to have a greater profit margin. And so again, it's all about kind of increasing the revenue of the corporation. They provide jobs to developing countries, and this helps to increase the standard of living in those countries. And in fact, if you take a look at the countries that have opened the doors to globalization, mainly thinking about China or India, for instance, if you take a look at the GDP of those countries, they have shot up exponentially. And in fact, it's predicted that China is going to overtake us by the mid 2020s, so like 2025, 2030, something like that. And I think India, they're projected to overtake our GDP by 2050. And so these countries, as they have globalized, they have increased their standard of living and they've increased their GDP. But of course, there are some negatives that we'll take a look at within this element. But the standard of living does improve over generations. It doesn't improve right away, but it does improve over generations. But again, the other side of globalization is they also bring with them their culture and their values, urging uniformity and conformity. And so whenever, McDonald's or Walmart goes into a particular country, they demand that the country operates the way that Walmart is used to operating. And so they're changing traditions, they're changing customs. Sometimes they're putting pressure on to change religious holidays, but they're changing the way people have done things for the last, several generations, if not centuries, or in some cases, millennia. And so the question is, as we go into these countries, should we Americanize them or make them adapt to our way of life, right? And some people, I think within, more of the business world, they would argue, well, our way of life is generally superior because we have a higher GDP. But if you're only looking at, people in terms of their net worth, then I guess it would make sense to go into these other countries to try to, quote unquote, improve their conditions. But what if people are happy with the way they're doing their business, right? What if they're happy with the way that their traditions and that? So then that does become more of a complexity. I'll give you one example of this. This is a case that went into one of the snack companies. I can't remember which one it was, if it was Nestle or one of them, or Toll House, something. Went into India to sell like a packaged cookie, right? Or maybe it was like a Little Debbie or something like that. And they wanted to go into India's, $1.3 billion or billion people market, and so that was a very lucrative thing for this particular company to do. And they put their product on the shelf, and no one bought it. And so then the company was taking a look at why aren't people in India buying this product, and what they found was that people in India buy their snacks and their food from street vendors. And so what the company did was they wanted to increase their revenues, right, to expand their profits. And so they went in and changed the laws. And so one of the laws was that what they argued was that buying food on the street was unsanitary. So they said that you can only buy things that are in packages. And so they're changing the values, they're changing the laws, they're changing the way of doing business in order to focus on uniformity and conformity to push people within a certain particular mindset. Another kind of aspect of this problem that we see with this Americanization is with the cultural exports, where we have, for instance, over here you have this, this Asian country and this woman who's selling her watermelons, and then next to that you have Pepsi and Coke. And so then the question is, what cultural elements are being lost as we homogenize the world? What individuality is being lost as we enter into these global markets? And then another thing to think about is the problems of languages, right? Where 50% of the world's languages are about to be lost, right? So 3,000 of the world's 6,000 to 7,000 languages are now endangered. And in fact, the Spory Gallery did an exhibit on this a couple of years ago, where they took a photograph of the last living speaker of that language. And a lot of them were Native American languages, people that lived in either North or South America, and their language is going to be extinct after that one person dies. And so we think about that, and I think that, a dismissive attitude perhaps would say, well, isn't it better that everyone speaks American or English, right? But I mean, that's kind of the mindset, is everyone just becomes American and thinks the way that Americans think. Because it streamlines the world, right? And most businesses throughout, or most universities throughout the world, when you take business classes, they're all in English. And in fact, a lot of other countries are pushing, their school children to learn English because the United States is such a powerhouse economically, and so there is that drive to be uniform. But the other question with that, right? The other kind of downside of that is language embodies a unique knowledge, unique ways of thinking, unique ways of life and of human history. And so, as we think about that, right? What truths are we losing as we lose a language? What insights could we have had if we were able to kind of preserve that language? And as you think about this in terms of, the Book of Mormon, what would happen is if we completely lost that record, right? What other records, what other kind of knowledges and truths are we losing with the loss of these religions? And so that does have more of a bite to it that makes it seem, maybe there is something to trying to preserve a culture or a heritage. Just to kind of think about, there's two sides, right? One is bettering the standard of living and bettering the way of life. That is true, but then it does come at a cost. And so we can't just take a look at it one way, in a unilateral sort of way. We need to take a look at the complexities to it if we're going to actually make an informed decision on that. I wanted to show you a clip from a news report that takes a look at this, the problems of Americanization, just so we can again see, what are the pros and what are the cons. This one is going to take a look at the epidemic that's happening in Kuwait. And some of the American values that are being exported. I do want to apologize that you're only going to see, part of the window of this. That's just the way kind of Loom works right now. So it's going to cut off a little bit of the bottom part. So I do apologize for that. But just take a look at what's happening here. Might be some of the costs, the unintended costs of Americanization and globalization.
5-year-old Nasser's got a spring in his step. And with the long summer holidays, his parents jump at the chance to send him here. But this isn't a playgroup, it's a business focused on getting kids like these moving. Here in Kuwait, there's a worry that youngsters are getting fatter and less active. And that's good news for boss Halda, who says sessions have filled up twice as fast as last summer.
10 years ago, when we opened the gym, everybody was like, are you crazy? Is this a business? Because a gym for a kid is a very strange concept here in Kuwait, because they never think of that. They never thought that this is important. A kid can play home. And now the demand is so high that people are asking for a second branch and a third branch.
But it's not just about children. Kuwait's a wealthy country, and its people's lifestyles are testament to that. But it's been given a wake-up call about the way people spend their time and money, with some sobering statistics. Kuwait's health problems are huge. Almost 9 out of 10 people in this country are overweight, and it's got the third highest rate of diabetes in the world. And experts say that a sedentary lifestyle, as well as a love of fast food, and the tendency to jump in the car to hang around in malls like this one, certainly isn't helping. And there's a warning that failing to address the issue will come at a major cost to society.
issue of obesity and diabetes, what we call the twin epidemics or the diseases of affluence, is very alerting for Kuwait, and especially the costs that it will hinder on the healthcare industry and on the government as well. If you have, say, labor who are diabetic or obese, it will definitely affect their labor productivity, and this will definitely have an impact on the economy.
But bulging bellies are leading to swelling profits at this company. It specialises in designing and cooking low-calorie meals and delivering them to people's doors. 4 years ago, they had about 300 customers around Kuwait. Now that number's nearer 2,000, and they've also got contracts for local hospitals. And because clients are willing to pay for this help to be healthier, they're having to move some work to another kitchen to meet demand.
In other countries, if you are overweight or obese, you tend to stand out. In Kuwait, you don't stand out, so it's very normal for you to be overweight or obese. People are getting more and more aware of their eating habits, and that there is a problem in Kuwait, and now it's the boom. You're looking at more than 10 years, this business will expand. It's the most profitable business in Kuwait currently.
That interest's encouraging for other Kuwaiti businesses already in the health and fitness sector. But there's movement from international investors too. This gym chain's aggressively expanded across the Gulf in the past couple of years, and it's confident its first Kuwaiti branch, due later this year, will be a hit.
The market is fairly uneducated in health and fitness, and not only that, there hasn't been the provision available. We have a lot of gyms in apartments and in hotels, but actually convenient locations in shopping malls where people congregate. There are not very many health club operators. Only 2% of the population belong to health clubs currently, and we're trying to get that up to the 10-11%, which is in more developed territories.
And there is hope. Even on hot summer evenings, people can be found exercising on the Corniche of Kuwait's capital. But the nation knows that to really make a difference, efforts by the government, businesses, and of course individuals all need to pick up the pace.
So as we think about globalization and how we go out to other countries and we bring businesses with us, right? But we also bring with us our way of life, our way of doing, of our style, our standard of living, and we can export some of the negative things that are problems with us, and that's just one of them. The obesity epidemic that we see in Kuwait, as we've exported fast food and a sedentary life, they've picked up on some of those bad habits. Thinking about some other problems of globalization, just to think about this from another standpoint, right? So some people would, focus only on the positives, and there's definitely some positives of globalization, but I want you to be able to see, the complete picture to this. Some arguments against the ecological damage. We talked about environmentalism, and that is going to be an ongoing concern for the foreseeable future as well. As we think about America's way of doing business, we tend to use up more resources than our fair share. And so, as we export our way of life, are we exporting those those negative habits as well? And think about the ecological damage. The tropical rainforests are being depleted at 2.43 acres per second. I think we covered some of this before. We've used 1/3 of the world's resources in the last 30 years. 80% of the world's forests are gone. We're estimating losing 137 plant and animal species per day, and 40% of the world waterways have become undrinkable, and use 100,000 synthetic chemicals that are in daily use. And so, as we are going to export our way of life to other countries, is that only going to create a larger ecological footprint, more damage to the environment that we need to consider? And as we think about our discussion with environmentalism, where the analogy that we're all on a boat, right? The boat that we're all on is Earth, and so the question is, how much room do we have for this ongoing this ongoing behavior. I also want us to think about another aspect of this in terms of the cheap labor. What are the effects of the cheap labor? And this one is in a report that's done on Apple, which generally is considered one of the more advantageous places to work. This is going to bring cameras into the Apple factories in China and talk a little bit about what's going on. And again, this is all kind of kept behind the curtain. A lot of times, these factories don't let us in to see what's happening, how our products are being made. And this one, there's a rare instance where they did allow us to be able to bring some cameras in. I wanted to show you some highlights from that.
It's all so stylish. The see-through stores, the pristine white packaging, touchscreens, all the more touchable since the company that makes them has been shrouded in tantalizing secrecy. Until now.
I'm told this is the very first time any reporter from any country has been allowed to see this.
We don dust-free bunny suits to watch a room filled with massive robots glide around with sheets of iPad glass.
Wow, look at that. It's like a scene out of WALL-E.
But these lines are the futuristic exception. And with Apple's reputation under fire, we're most interested in the people who build their complex gadgets one tiny piece at a time. As a whole, it's an incredibly complex process, but look at the individuals, and you see mostly teenagers from the countryside, 17, 18-year-olds far away from very poor homes.
So this is home.
They live in a dorm with 7 strangers, spend 6 days a week repeating the same task again and again. Fatigue and boredom are common in any factory, but this one is surrounded by suicide nets. They are everywhere. A horrifying reminder of 18 workers who jumped from the buildings here at Foxconn City in the past few years. The suicide rate in this massive company is lower than average in China, but after people jumped in such a sobering cluster, Foxconn opened a counseling center and raised starting wages about 25 cents an hour.
I wonder, though, if it wasn't for the spate of suicides, did it take something that severe to make you rethink how you treated your workers here?
I think absolutely. What we are facing is changing in a much rapid pace than we could have anticipated in the past. Right? So we're also changing.
As the Fair Labor Association collects employee grievances on, get this, iPads.
You can be honest.
We talked to dozens of employees, on camera and off, and the most common complaint, low pay. Most, like Zhao Xiaoying, can't afford to live with their own children, much less buy one of the products they help build. While she carves thousands of Apple logos onto the backs of iPads every shift, she's never actually seen a working iPad.
What do you want the people who end up buying this to know about you?
I want them to know me, she says. I want them to know we put a lot of effort into this product, and when they use it, please use it with care.
So what we see within this are, again, some of the effects and the unintended consequences to some extent of globalization and things that are by and large kept from us as we buy our iPads or our iPhones. We generally don't see the kind of conditions the workers are working in to get us to be able to get a product at the lowest possible cost, and again to allow the company to make the most amount of increase to their investment. And so the idea here is that we have these young kids, sometimes they're teenagers, going to these factories and living there for sometimes months on end and not getting a day off. And living in very harsh conditions for very low pay, and then they have to implement suicide nets for an influx of suicides that had happened there. And so this idea of globalization is going to be an ongoing concern as we move forward. And again, the question is going to be, how do we frame this, right? Has globalization been or become a kind of a quasi cult or quasi type religion or quasi fundamentalist type of idea, this kind of extremist idea where we put all of our eggs in this globalization basket, and on one side, and then on the other side, we're going to have the battle against it. Now, taking a look at some of the major ideas that Benjamin Barber takes a look at in terms of the McWorld, this globalization, this capitalist mindset, he suggests that there is a market imperative. The market imperative is going to be the drive for companies to open up new markets in different countries in order to increase the amount of people who are going to buy the products. And then there's also a resource imperative, and this is the two imperatives that for globalization that push us to other countries. The resource imperative is looking for natural resources and cheap labor, and so these are the two driving forces that cause companies to go and to into other countries for their markets. And I think this is kind of these two images at the bottom here are interesting juxtapositions where KFC, interestingly, is the #1 food chain in China. It's kind of an interesting thought in and of itself. And the second picture is a picture that I took. My wife and I were in Switzerland on a business trip, and one day we kind of snuck away off into the Swiss Alps, and I wanted to see the the pure essence of what Switzerland was all about. And I kind of foolishly hoped that I would see some Swiss person swinging from the Alps in lederhosen. I don't know. Kind of weird stereotypical thoughts that you have, but you're kind of hoping to find some of the pure essence. So we went off way into the distance, way into the interior of Switzerland, away from the big cities. And as we're walking through one of the towns, lo and behold, I stumble upon a Hooters, and I thought, that is Americanization, right? The idea that there can be a Hooters anywhere, even the smallest, remotest part of Switzerland, there still can be an American establishment there. That is, the essence of globalization. That's the essence of Americanization. And then the question is, should these elements be here, right? What's being lost as a result? And in some ways, there are some benefits to having, globalization hit the home front, right? If you want to have the same kind of taste or the same kind of experience, then it's nice to have that continuity, right? If you want it to a McDonald's, you want a quarter pounder or something, then that's going to give you what to expect, right? But when you go to other establishments that are new, then there's a lot more ambiguity. But again, that could be a part of the fun. The idea of the jihad isn't necessarily entirely just this kind of religious extremist movement, and at least in Benjamin Barber's mindset, he suggests that jihadists. The jihadist term that he used, much like he uses McWorld as kind of a demarcation for the larger globalization efforts, the jihadist efforts are just a demarcation of any type of struggle against globalization. So this is a struggle against isolationism, or a struggle for isolationism, and to try to move away from this push to become uniform and to conform to the Western way of doing things. And a couple examples that he provides are the Sunni Muslims, or the Basques in Spain, which we talked about before when we were taking a look at Guernica, that they don't really see themselves as Spanish or French. They see themselves as a group unto themselves. And so it's any type of movement that is resisting globalization type efforts. And what he argues is that this tension between this effort to globalize and this effort to maintain individuality and heritage and tradition are going to come to a head. And so, and again, he's writing this in the 1980s, and so in some ways he really does predict September 11th, this conflict of this jihadist movement who felt that they were at this existential crisis with the West, that it was either us or them, right? That's the kind of the fundamentalist, extremist mindset of this dualistic kind of perspective. And so they reacted, right? And they reacted in a way to try to send a message. And so again, the question is, what did they attack? They attacked the World Trade Center. And that is the symbol of globalization, the idea of the world coming together and trading and bringing the world into one economy. And so they attacked these two towers, and that's the essence of jihad. And then the other building that they attacked was the Pentagon in D.C. And the Pentagon is another element to globalization, because whenever a company from the United States goes into another country, it comes with the invisible hand of the military to protect the American interests. And so the Pentagon is another symbol of Americanization and trade. And so again, they're attacking the very symbols of this idea of conformity and unity. And taking a look at the 2016 presidential election, what you have, is, in a sense, is to kind of connect this with Benjamin Barber, is a similar idea, right? A jihadist type mindset versus a McWorld type mindset. And I'll frame that a little bit differently as we read through this, but I want you to think about it in those kind of terms, right? So what we see with Clinton and Trump are two very different images of the world in that 2016 campaign. Half of the nation are drawbridge uppers, right? So that would be like if you're a drawbridge is something that connects one particular area to another, right? One town to another town, or one part of the town to another part of the town. So a drawbridge upper is someone that doesn't want that connection. So that would be more of a jihadist type individual who doesn't want, connection and wants to maintain more of a tribalist type of mindset. And then half of the nation were drawbridge downers, which are, you're thinking about, connecting, drawing that drawbridge down, is that connecting to that other part of the world or other part of town. And that would be the efforts of McWorld or, globalization. In the idea of drawbridge uppers versus drawbridge downers, that terminology, different from Benjamin Barber, McWorld versus Jihad, right? Just different terminologies, but for the same concept. Drawbridge uppers versus drawbridge downers was something that was done by another academic known as Jonathan Haidt, who examined that tension that's going on within the world. We are divided as a nation in terms of trade and immigration, right? Clinton would like to deteriorate the national borders even more and create stronger trade agreements with other nations. Trump, on the other hand, wanted to strengthen our borders and build walls, right? So he talked about building the wall between the United States and Mexico, right? The idea is to try to preserve our autonomy, preserve our borders, and then to also, what he wanted to do is reduce international trade agreements by imposing higher taxes on imports and ending pacts like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which he did when he took to office. But what we see here are there are two very different directions for America that highlight the tension of globalization and isolationism. And so the idea here, the question I get is, well, what side are you on, right? What side am I on as a person? And I don't want you to think about what side I'm on. I want you to think about how do we deal with this, right? Because in some ways there's some value to extending the hand and having that globalization, that connectivity, and having more of a collaboration. But again, we've talked about some of the negative aspects of that come with that, right? And on the other side, there's something to be said about, preserving who we are, preserving identity and things of that nature. And so what matters more is what side you're on, right? And so thinking about this, there's also this tension happening within Europe, and they have this idea of drawbridge uppers versus drawbridge downers as we think about the European Union. And what you have is a lot of countries that are starting to rethink this idea of the European Union, where countries deteriorated their national borders, where now it's the same driving between Switzerland and France, or driving between Germany and Austria is like driving between the states, right? Between Idaho and Utah. There's no borders anymore because of the European Union, and now they have a common currency which further focuses on unity. And so this was something that was developed in the early 2000s with the European Union, and now they're starting to rethink that, and they're starting to think, well, maybe we need to be more drawbridge uppers. And so again, this is going to be one of the major conflicts that we see going forward for the next 10, 20 and beyond years, right? So Great Britain kind of was the first one to think about to rethink this. They already had kind of one foot in the European Union, one foot out, right? So they had the idea of the shared borders, but they kept the British pound, so they didn't move to the EU's currency. But now they're rethinking their boundaries. They're rethinking this idea. Maybe they want to preserve their boundaries. And the main issue that's driving people to want, or nations to want to withdraw from the European Union, is the influx of refugees. And you have a lot of refugees that are running from places in Africa for political refuge because they're being persecuted and put to death. So they're leaving and they're flocking to other places for safety, and they're hitting Europe, and particularly they're hitting in a lot of ways they're hitting Italy. If you think about Italy and its proximity to Africa and the fact that it's a peninsula and boats can kind of arrive anywhere on that coast, it becomes particularly susceptible to a lot of influx of refugees, and a lot of them are just families that are seeking to work, they're seeking independence, they're seeking freedom, they're seeking safety. And so, in a lot of ways, they're just peaceful individuals that are just there trying to find their dream for their family. The difficulty for the local communities is there's so many of them. The question is, what do we do with the jobs? What do we do with unemployment? How do we maintain housing and things like that? So it's starting to strain their economy, is starting to strain their way of doing business. And then the other fear is that there might be some terrorist pockets that are sneaking along in these boats, and these cells that are sneaking into Europe as well. So you have people that are becoming more xenophobic, more afraid of foreigners, that's on the rise in Europe. You have also, what's happening in Europe is more anti-Semitism, and so you have these kind of these old problems that are starting to re-emerge with the growing tensions. And so with Brexit, again, you have this idea of wanting to preserve boundaries, wanting to have the control over who enters the country, who gets to stay in the country and who doesn't. But it's an ongoing problem because part of England includes Northern Ireland. And so then the question is, do you put a boundary between Northern Ireland and Ireland? And that's a whole complex issue that has deep-seated roots of conflict within the past. And so that's why the European Union hasn't really gone through with Brexit fully, and there's constantly voting on how to handle it, and they keep kicking the can down the road. But again, there's other countries like Italy that are kind of pushing for this reform and moving away from that. I also want to take a look at the complexities of globalization on the home front. So there are some complexities to this. There's again benefits, but I want to think about this in terms of what do we, how does this affect the average person in the United States? And there are tremendous implications of globalization. One of them clearly is the lack of jobs that are happening as countries are continually, or as companies continually seek to send work overseas to find cheap labor. That directly affects the American worker, and they now call the Midwest the Rust Belt, where a lot of the automotive companies have left. I grew up in Michigan, and so Michigan was the preeminent place for cars. You had GM that was centered there. You had Oldsmobile that was centered there. You had Pontiac. You had Ford. Everything was kind of, a lot of them were centered in Michigan, and now a lot of those factories are gone. Flint, Michigan is one example of a community that was completely devastated when GM closed its doors. And I think there's some plants that are still, like Ford still kind of functions a little bit in Detroit. But it's devastated. Michigan has devastated the Midwest and places around Chicago and Pittsburgh and that. And so you have the devastation to the workforce. And another devastation as far as globalization is concerned is this image here, where another academic writes a book called The Geography of Nowhere. His name was Kunstler. He writes the idea of the geography of nowhere, and what he argues within this is what we live in, the towns, the communities that we live in are now essentially nowhere. What we used to have, if you think about the old way that we used to, the old kind of community that we used to live in, would be the downtown area would be filled with shops where you can go shopping, buy your groceries. Then right next to them would be housing and schools and churches, and it would be all centered in the downtown area within walking distance. And what you have since the 1950s, and we talked about this in an earlier lecture, with the development of the interstate, you have all of the businesses that are now going to the exits, and we see a lot of this in Rexburg. Rexburg still, for the most part, is a walking community. You have a lot of the downtown area. You have the university there. You have some churches that are all within walking distance. But for the most part, a lot of the businesses, Walmart, for instance, has moved to the outskirts of town to an exit, and then the schools, the high school in Madison is on another exit, and so a lot of the life is now moved away from the downtown areas, which is leaving the downtown areas essentially deserted. And then what you have with the shopping, the mom and pop stores die, and then the shopping that you have on the outskirts of town is mainly, these cookie cutter, this box stores that are all the same, all identical. And so what you have is, rather than individuality of towns, right, the mom and pop store is the essence of what makes a town, you have the geography of nowhere, where every town essentially looks the same. And we talked a little bit about that before with McDonald's and Walmart all looking the same and being the same and feeling the same, and there's a loss of that individuality. With, again, thinking about the idea of globalization promotes uniformity, conformity, and the loss of individuality. And so some of those ideas are manifest within our local communities. And I think this is a kind of an interesting trend that I noticed. This is in Farmington, Utah. What you have now is that local shopping stores, and so this is Farmington here is just a shopping center. Or this is a shopping center in Farmington, Utah. And what you have here is the shopping center makes it feel as though it's a Norman Rockwell type town, right? You have the nice old-fashioned lights. You have a fountain here, and you have this building that kind of looks like an old-fashioned shop. But essentially, it's not a shop, right? And then you have here, this is the same shopping center. You have in the summertime the outdoor furniture, which makes it look like it's your backyard and makes it feel kind of homey. So they're creating this essence of this small town feel to the life, but it's not, right? So again, this is another image that you see that gives you the sense of this is a downtown. But number one, it's not downtown. It's not near other shopping. It's not near other schools. It's not near homes. You still have to drive towards it. And the other idea that this is not a downtown area is a public space where people can go and they can protest, they can go and they can have, they can't really be kicked out per se unless they're, doing something violent or dangerous or whatnot. But this here, this is a private property, right? So where the life now is now on private property, which creates a whole different dynamic, right? You can't go protest against J. Crew while you're on J. Crew's property. They can kick you out, right? So it's a different kind of mindset. So we're losing that kind of community. We're losing that public voice that we used to have. And so taking a look at a couple of movements that are, in a sense, quasi-jihadist type movements, or what I mean by that is not that they're, seeking to create war, but they're seeking to combat this globalization on the home front. One of them is in Celebration, Florida, what you have in Celebration, Florida, which is outside, it's like a suburb of Orlando. And in fact, the border of Celebration backs up to Disney. And so in a lot of ways, this is kind of a Disney development. But what you have in Celebration is the developers came here and they wanted to create a 1950s Norman Rockwell type of a town where it has the the shopping center and the houses that are all close together within walking distance. And so this is the antithesis to the suburb that we've talked about before. It's pretty strict to live there. You can't have, for instance, any lawn ornaments on your lawn. No two houses can look identical, and so this is a reaction against the suburbs and cookie cutter architecture. But again, the problem that you have with celebration is the people that work in these kind of communities, the people that work in the downtown area, can't afford to live there. It's so expensive to own a home in Celebration that that the workers can't live there, so they actually have to live in another part of Orlando and then drive in every morning to give the people who can afford to live there the feeling that they're living in this kind of community, when in fact it's kind of an artificial community. It's kind of a quasi looking towards the past. In some ways, this kind of relates to our extremism or fundamentalism, right? Looking to the past to try to find some type of roots of what has been lost and trying to preserve that kind of heritage. And so it's kind of an interesting place. And in fact, during Christmas time, I don't know if they used to do, I don't know if they still do this, but they used to do this. They would, since the average temperature in Orlando in December is 75 degrees, so it's not really conducive for that Norman Rockwell white Christmas. So what they'll do for the Christmas parade is they have a bubble machine that are lined within the streets, and so they will create bubbles, and so there'll be bubbles here to give you the sense that you're in this kind of I don't know, mythical kind of illusionary feeling of this kind of interesting town. And so in a lot of ways it's kind of weird. It kind of feels a little delusional, feels kind of artificial, but it's that reaction to this idea of globalization. How do we preserve individuality? How do we preserve that independence? And so another academic, his name is Andrew Ross. He went down to Celebration to write an article or write a book on his experience. He heard about this and he's like, this is weird. They must be filled with a bunch of weirdos. And so he went down there to live there for a year, and he wrote about his experience. And it's called Celebration Chronicles, right? So Celebration, the name of the town, and Chronicles, just he's chronicling his experiences there. And he kind of comes in, and he's from New York, and he just kind of sees this as a kind of hardened New Yorker, as kind of on the outside. But then as he lives there a year, he actually finds that he loves it. He kind of falls in love with the place and the community, and realizes that they're not, just a bunch of weirdos living down there. They're actually people that have, values and ideas and dreams, and there's kind of a purpose for living in this type of community. The last community that I wanted to take a look at, as far as a kind of a quasi-jihadist, or at least a reaction to the globalization on the home front, is Portland. And what you have with Portland, what they decided to do early on, was to create city ordinances that restricted the boundaries of Portland. And so that meant that Portland cannot expand beyond a certain, distance. And so what that meant was that this is going to reduce the suburban sprawl. And so you're not going to just have these, like in LA or something, this ongoing suburbs that just go on for forever. And what that does instead is it makes, instead of growing out, the buildings go up. And so the effect of this is that you have more of a walking, more of a bicycling kind of community to resist the car culture, the interstate culture that has been developed in the 1950s, and also the suburban culture that was developed in the 1950s, to try to preserve its own, independence. And I think that the motto of Portland is "Keep Portland Weird," and so they're trying to maintain their individuality. They're trying to maintain their autonomy from the exterior global forces which weigh upon them. And so as we conclude today, a part of what I wanted you to think about within this is this idea of extremism and how we tend to see the world in this binary either or. And certainly we see that within the McWorld versus Jihad mindset, where the McWorld only sees that the world has to conform to its kind of way of doing business, and the jihadists feel threatened by that, and they say, no, we need to preserve our way of doing business. And so you have this dualistic either or mindset. And what I wanted to show you is there's some more complexities to that, right? And so again, as we take a look at the war on terror, I also want you to think about that the jihadists do have a perspective, right? They do have some concerns. And although I don't agree with their approach and, the murder and the extreme measures that they go to, we can at least understand to some extent where they're coming from. And because if we only kind of see them within a binary, then we're not really going to understand some of the concerns. But if we can understand some of the concerns and we can relate it to some of our own concerns that we have to try to preserve our own autonomy, then maybe we can kind of come together to understand and to move forward. Rather than just seeing something as a simple problem with a simple solution, we can see it more as a nuanced problem that's going to take more of a complex, multilateral approach to it. And so as we kind of conclude here our discussion of religion and religious extremism and some of the elements that have replaced religion in our world today, we can start to think about what are going to be some of the major problems